Crankbaits for bass in winter and spring work great in cold water, especially red crankbaits for bass. Watch as I use shallow crankbaits for bass during a big cold front and catch big largemouth bass better and better as I fine-tune the bite while shallow cranking for bass.
Man, it's 70 degrees right now, first thing in the morning. A warm front came overnight, and the storm's coming in a few minutes, and then it's gonna turn super cold after that. Supposed to get down to 20 tonight, so all day the temperature drop. There's south winds at 30 plus miles an hour right now. Storm's coming through, and then north wind's supposed to blow at like 35, 40 as this big cold front hits. So maybe they'll bite. I hope so, because if not, I'm gonna freeze my butt off.
So I tried to beat the front. I got to the lake at first light there, and before it was south wind blowing, and the rain came in quick. They really didn't bite before it, and there were some thunderstorms, so I got out of Dodge pretty quick and hid under a dock while the rain came through, because I knew it was going to be pretty cold after that. It was a little disappointed, but then as all of a sudden the rain moved out, I mean, it instantly turns to post-frontal. The wind switches from the south to the north, and then it clears off like super fast. The crazy part was, though, is as the front came in, the water temp started to drop, that north wind howled. That's when the fish started biting. I started off, I ran up to a cove on the north side where the south wind had been blowing in. It's kind of a spawning bay, went to the back of that creek, and that's when I find the fish right away. They started out small, and as you'll see during the day, you know, the size picks up. You can see it's kind of cold, and I'm not really in my my groove yet. Can't hang onto the rod. I started out losing some fish. So before the front, I thought they'd be active. I tried a lot of bladed jigs, swim jig and stuff. They just weren't chasing it. And it was more that cold front bite. So that's when I went to the Berkley, the Fritzside 5. I was using the clicking version, the one with the little knocker in it, and then using the Ghost Red Craw, which is a kind of a transparent red craw color. And that really seemed to be the deal for the first half of the day, as that water was clear, had a lot of grass in there as well. After the cold fronts, a lot of times the red baits really work well, and that's where I cycled through a few. This is the Berkley Jack 6, the new lipless crankbait they have. I catch one on a red lipless here. I try the bladed jig here in a second as well. But really, at that Fritz side, I kept on trying good spots during the day, and that Fritz side was what they wanted. They kept on eating that thing, and I'd pick up other baits, try to cycle through, and just couldn't get them to eat them. So red was the deal. Definitely I tried other colors, but the Fritzside 5 was that just tight wiggling crankbait was what they really wanted today. And I'll let the footage run here a little bit. This is, I catch two back-to-back on that Fritzside. The thing was, you would cover a lot of water, and all of a sudden you run into a little spot. There were usually points, but sometimes it was a little grass clump or something. And once you found one, you could go back through there multiple times during the day, or you could power pole down like I'm doing here, and then you catch a couple fish in the same spot. And I was using just that same bait, and then slow working the Fritz side, just crank it over the grass. There was some eelgrass out there. There was a lot of coontail. There was some milfoil, some hydrilla. But getting on those grass lines, they were kind of, with all the wind, they weren't on that deep edge. Some spots the grass was out, say, 4 to 8 feet deep, but most of them were up on top of the grass or even on the inside edge. So I could catch some fish back in those protected pockets, and you can see a little more ripple here, but basically I had to move out to the main lake, and those main lake points, the deeper grass with some deep water around it, that's where the better fish were. And as I do this and I get more in the wind, I mean, I'm directly in the north wind now in a lot of these spots, that's when the bite really got better. You can see on my retrieve, I'm making long casts out there. I'm trying to feather it over the top of the grass. That, you know, that Fritz side's going to run 5-6 feet down there, and it would hit the top of the grass. Instead of putting my pole straight down and trying to crank it as deep as I can, I'm pulling it up. I'm doing stop and goes. I'm doing little snaps. A lot of those bites, that little hesitation when it breaks free of the grass, or pulling it up when it changes direction instead of digging down, comes back up. That's when a lot of the fish hit. And you see a lot of them almost the whole day, they're just slapping at the bait. I tried different colors and stuff. They wanted the red, but they weren't, I never had them deep down in the gills, but a couple times all day, and that's catching a lot of fish. That frit side comes with Fusion 19 trebles on it, the round bend ones, and the ones that are more turned in, the extra wide gap, I like those if fish are really eating it, but when they're slapping, those round bend tend to get them. And if you use a nice soft rod, you can land a lot of fish that are only swatting at it. And you'll see today, most of the fish that I catch, like I said, they're just swatting at it, and I get them in the side of the face, under the chin, one hook in them. So those sharp hooks and the round bend, I think, are the way to go. So I'm using 12-pound fluoro. I'm using the Berkley 100% fluoro. Links to all the products I'm talking about in the video will be down in the description below. But then the main thing to me was that Veritas winch rod. It's an Abu Garcia one. This is actually a prototype when they were changing up the grips and stuff. So it's just a straight white. Looks a little bit different, but it's the same rod I've been using for cranking for these shallow and medium run cranks for a long time. It's 7'6". It's medium heavy, but it has a moderate fast action. If you look at the tip, it really bends deep, and a lot of these fish, like I said, are barely hooked. That bait will fling them out in the wind, or that rod will fling them out in the wind, and it keeps them hooked up. I mean, I just love that thing for cranking. You'll see during the day here, that thing's doubled over on all these good fish and keeps them hooked up, except for when I'm lazy and don't bend over and lip them. As the day wears on, it gets more and more aggressive. And they so wanted that frit side. It was kind of crazy. I talked about going through different baits. I had one time where I threw up in the eelgrass, and I had those antennae that grow off it that are probably like 12 inches long, trailing off the bait. And I had a fish that followed the bait, even with I've never had that happen before, that long grass in there, he wanted it. And I see him falling behind it. I paused it, and he eats it right at the boat, even fouled with, like I said, like 12 inches of grass off both hooks. And that fish was on for a split second. But man, that frit side today, they definitely wanted to eat it. Now, as the day wears on, the north wind is just pounding against that south bank. That's where the fish are at, but it's starting to get muddy. I mean, it literally gusted to 39 miles per hour that day. It was over 30 the whole day. And instead of using that clear clicking frit side, I changed to the Berkley frit side 5, and I used this special red craw, which is more red and orange. It's a little bit brighter. It's not see-through or translucent. And in the muddier water, that more orangish red worked out better, and that's in this, I guess, last half of the day. That's where I catch a lot of the fish on, and some of the bigger fish ate that as well. So this is the first time I had that Express H20 out in a big wind, and it does drift more. You know, that's always a knock on aluminum, but I was impressed. I was able to stay out there. You'll see I'm out in the wind all day. It's plenty stable, and the one thing I like about it, I can actually spot lock with my Garmin Force there, and I'm not taking water over the bow constantly. I have the standard length shaft. That's the 50-inch shaft, and it's nice not to be just washing the front of the boat all the time. And you see there, that's a pretty nice one. As the day wore on, I was catching those. It was big wind, but man, the better ones started biting, and the bite got more steady as well. You see the downside of the fish in the wind, though. There are a few stumpy spots out there, and man, I snagged up and almost dumped it in. Now, late in the day, the sun's starting to get lower, and I had them dialed in. I knew some key spots there, and I would sit there and just anchor lock with my Force and sit on spots, and they were there. I would just recast, and that happens a lot in the winter and spring when it's pre-spawn. Those fish are grouped up in spots, and at this point, I've got it dialed in with that frit side, and you just start harvesting. And at this point, I'm just looking for a great big fish. You know, from all the years guiding in Texas on fork, I found that a lot. When the cold front comes through, like when the front first transitions, I catch a lot of fish. And that's kind of today. They bite good. They're really aggressive. The water temperature stays the same though until the water temperature really drops. That's when the bigger ones bite, and you see that as the day wore on. I caught bigger fish, and I really think the next day the wind was howling. If I went back out there, all of a sudden the water temp's going from the low 50s all of a sudden into the 40s. That's when the big fish kind of feel it, and they get grouped up in those key spots. Typically the day of the front, I catch numbers. The day after the front, it's miserable. But as long as that wind's still blowing and you know where they're grouped up at, where you caught all those fish yesterday, that's when I catch my great biggest fish. The bite changed a bit too. You can see these inside grass lines where there's shallow, what I call hay grass, just shore grass there. The wind pushing against it late in the day, they got real tight to the shore. So instead of fishing out under the submerged grass, they're pretty much right up on the bank there. And I could just spot lock on these key spots, bring it parallel to the grass, and then those fish were eating it right up on the bank. That happens a lot when it's super windy. I tell you, one of the biggest changes I've seen in fishing, a few years ago we fished out in the wind and you were afraid your battery's going to die. You just couldn't do it. I have the Garmin Force trolling motor and dual 36 volt MillerTech lithium batteries. I fished out in the wind the whole day, and this isn't with a powerful charge or anything, just a standard battery charger. All day out in the wind, and I still had 70% power in my trolling motor batteries when I got home that night. I could have fished 3 days without plugging in. Crazy how that's changed. It really opens you up where you can go fish in the wind, in the current, as long as you want.